Hi, welcome back to Talooli Trails. I'm Jeff and we're at Camp Talooli today. And through the videos that we've been making and through all the other ways we interact with kids, it's easy to see camp is a lot of fun. And kids learn all kinds of things about getting along and growing up together. But what's interesting is that camp is also a place where kids can see in action the kinds of things that they're learning in school. We have a full-time nature director here in the summertime, and we have 25 or 30 schools that come here for educational field trips in the spring and the fall. And one of the things that teachers and kids like is that they can see here at camp some of the things that they find in their textbooks, but now happening in real life. Let me show you an example. Come on in close. Now this is my rough sketch of a diagram I've seen in lots of textbooks for elementary and middle and high school students. It talks about the idea that originally a pond might end up being a dent in the landscape. Around here we've got rock way down low, we've got lots of glacial sediments, and someplace in here the water builds up. And so hey, it's a pond. But over time, we know that a pond will change. We know that sediments will wash off the sides and they'll form sediment deposits on the sides of the lake. And we know that leaves will fall off trees every fall, and those leaves will settle to the bottom of the lake and make an organic layer. And what's interesting is that we see this in textbooks a lot, and it's called ecological succession of a water body or of a pond. So one of the things that's clearly happening over the life of a pond is it's getting shallower. There's sediments on the side and sediments in the bottom, and the new bottom of the pond might look like that. And here at our lake at Camp Talooli, we can see exactly this happening. But there's also something else that's happening. We're actually creating new land here on the edges. And over time, what was water can now become an environment for new trees and new shrubs and plants to grow. So you're getting less pond and more land. Let me go show you an example of what this looks like right here at Camp Talooli. So we walked about 100 feet down the boardwalk along Lake Temelo, and what you can see right here is the hillside coming down in and going out to the lake. And that hillside continues right out into the lake. You have to remember that we know that this lake is about 10 or 12,000 years old. How do we know? Because it's called a glacial kettle. This was literally a giant block of glacial ice in the recession as the glaciers were dying, and it dented the sediments here. And the lake is the surface of the local water table. Now come for a quick walk and I'll show you right close to the edge of the lake where you can see those sediments building up right now. Now when we use the word sediment, there's two kinds. There's the broken up bits of rock, the sand and gravel, and then there's also the organic, the dead leaves and so forth that fall in the center of the lake. Right here we can see the sediment. Look down close at the edge of the lake. You can see where the water has run down the hillside under heavy rain conditions, and as it flows into the lake, it drags gravel and sand, the broken bits of rock, right out into the lake. And by the way, that sand is an excellent nesting material for the bass and the bluegills that live here in the lake. So we've hiked over to Hidden Lake to see a slightly different version of this. If our lake is 10 or 12,000 years old, that's a lot of years for sediment to flow in and a lot of years for organic matter to fall from the leaves into the lake to build up the bottom. And over here at Hidden Lake, it's in that same amount of time. Here was again a hillside going to a depression, which became a body of water at the end of the last ice age. But now there's been so much sediment that a large portion of the shoreline has been buried and has become actual forest. And not only has sediment come down and now become forest on the edge, but we've actually got plants, specialized plants, growing out over the edge of this pond on both sides, making a bog mat of sphagnum moss and blueberries and other kinds of things that can float. And we can actually see these trees on the new land, and we can see the specialized plants that are growing on the bog mat. Come on down to the edge of the lake. So in the life cycle of Hidden Lake is getting very old. Look how flat the land is here. But it wasn't always land. This was the lake 12,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age, but it's been filled in with the sediments rolling off the side. Now there's enough soil to actually grow birch trees and maple trees and all kinds of things. But as we get closer to the lake, watch how the landscape will change even more. So now we're at the edge of Hidden Lake, one of my favorite places in camp, because this lake is so old, so far down the succession line, that now there is sphagnum moss and other plants growing right all over the surface. In fact, when we put this wood down, we can actually bounce a little bit on the landscape, and we can bounce around because this is not really land made out of soil. This is a floating bog mat. And it's such an unusual environment. Most trees can't live here. What can live here? Well, we've got blueberries, certain kinds of ferns, and most importantly, everything is growing on this sphagnum moss. I'll pull a little piece up. This sphagnum moss is in charge of everything because it will float, it can live in water all year round, and this becomes what is in fact making the floating bog mat. And this is how we know this is a very old landscape. I also thought I found a new tree that's almost never seen in camp. Come on over here. So the deal is that here at the edge of the lake, we have all this sphagnum moss. We're bouncing around on a floating mat, and the truth is, most of our common landscape trees just can't do that. You can't have maples, and you can't have, big white pines and so forth like we have in camp. But there are a few trees that have figured out how to live in this hostile environment of floating bog. We can have some little alders, we can have some blueberries, and right here is one of the rarest trees in camp. This is a little red spruce. Now we have lots of Norway spruce and other kinds of trees, but they couldn't live here. The little red spruce is adapted to living in a hostile bog-like environment. And it's maybe the first in a new wave of trees which will eventually cover this whole area. Remember, succession tells us that everything's constantly changing, and eventually this pond will fill in, eventually the bog mat will close over, eventually this tree will grow, and eventually this will all become forest. So I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the succession and the life cycle of ponds today here on Talooli Trails. And one of the things I wanted to mention was the fact that this idea actually came to us from one of our teacher friends. We have dozens of teachers that bring their kids to Camp Talooli for educational field trips. And this one came from Mrs. Zay out in Gloversville, because her students are studying this exact topic. So if you're a teacher and there's something that you're teaching your kids and you want us to put together a special video, you send me an email or you talk to us on Facebook, and I'll see what we can do. So long for now. This is Jeff from Talooli Trails. In my whole life, I've known how important it is to be out in nature because, frankly, you never know what you're going to learn. After all these years of being at Camp Talooli, we were just walking up this trail just now, and we saw something I had never seen before. We saw a bunch of brand new baby wood ducks that had just jumped out of their nests. Wood ducks nest in hollow trees or sometimes in man-made nesting boxes, and they can be 10, 20, 30, or 40 feet up in the air. They can be 100 yards or more from the lake. And we happened to be here at exactly the right magical moment to see the baby wood ducks scampering down this hillside and heading towards the lake like they were on fire. They were in such a hurry. And then, sure enough, with the high-pitched squeaks of their mom, she went out there and she coaxed them all out onto the lake. So I want to share this magic moment with you. Baby wood ducks headed to the lake. What an awesome thing. Oh yeah, follow them down to the water. These are baby wood ducks. Oh, there's another one up there, Kel.
There's three.